Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler. Our guest on today's podcast, joining us from the south part of Salt Lake County, is my friend Hunter Knott. Welcome to the podcast, Hunter.
Hi, Richard. How's it going?
It's going good. I'll introduce Hunter like I do most of my guests. He is a gay Latter-day Saint. He's 25 years old. He sent me an email a while ago, and like most of my guests, reach out, and I'm just super honored when someone feels like it would be a safe place to share their story as a queer Latter-day Saint. He's 25. He's a software engineer. He graduated from UVU with a computer science degree. And he's just going to share his story about figuring out his sexual orientation, serving a mission during COVID, and talking about his path forward. As I've read his outline and have visited with Hunter, this is just a super spiritually mature, emotionally mature, really good man who's been navigating a complex road as a Latter-day Saint, and in a position where he can share his story. And guys like Hunter are just sort of my heroes. This podcast would have died 9 years ago, except that brave people like Hunter step forward and are willing to share their stories. And we said a prayer that you, our listeners, especially younger queer people, or maybe even older queer people, the things Hunter shares with you will help you. And if you're a parent or an ally, the things Hunter shares will help you. Hunter's pretty involved in the BYU LGBTQ world in Utah County, and he probably will share some latest teachings, some latest trainings, some latest things that are going on in Utah County that might be good stories or might be still things that are painful that we need to work on to improve. Is that okay for an introduction, Hunter?
Yeah, that was great. And
Okay.
yeah, just a little more specific, South Utah, South Salt Lake County. I went to Jordan High School, so I'm a beat digger. And yeah, right now I'm in Sandy, Utah.
We love Sandy, Utah.
Awesome. Alrighty. So yeah, you want me to go ahead and just start with the
Go
introduction?
ahead.
Okay.
You're up, my friend, and we're so glad you're here.
Okay, yeah, glad to be here. So, yeah, to kind of start off, like Richard said, I'm 25 years old, gay Latter-day Saint in Utah. I'm a software engineer. Right now, I'm working at a car tuning company. So I'm making an app for them. And basically, the company works on Volkswagens and Audis. And for people who like to race their cars, they want them to accelerate quicker, have like cool effects like crackles when they step down on the accelerator. So yeah, definitely not my specialty with cars, but I do like making apps. So it's a pretty fun company. Um, yeah, with hobby-wise, I really like to go running. Like while I'm running, I really like listening to podcasts like Richard's, and also listening to lots of different kinds of music. And I really like to make smoothies as well. So yeah, every morning I make a smoothie. Right now, my favorite smoothie flavor is probably a dragon fruit and passion fruit smoothie. Um, yeah, I think the flavor is really nice. It comes out a nice purple color. Um, yeah, so just absolutely love smoothies. Um, yeah, as for growing up in my family, so I come from a family of five where I'm the youngest sibling. So I have my two parents, mom and dad, and then two older brothers. Um, a little bit about our dynamic. I kind of joke about it where there's my oldest brother and my middle brother. They're kind of like the parable of the prodigal son, where you have the middle brother who's a little more like wayward, and then you have the oldest brother who's like a little more strict. But what they don't tell you is that there's actually a secret third brother who's hiding in the closet, and that's me.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so yeah, we're a Latter-day Saint family, Utah. I got baptized at the age of 8. Yeah, about my personality, I've always been kind of a rule follower. Always had good grades in school. Um, I'm a little bit more of an introvert, so I really liked playing video games. So for anybody who likes like Minecraft or Pokemon, anything like that, um, when I was a little older, I started playing a lot of Dungeons and Dragons with friends. So yeah, kind of that nerdy stuff I really like. Um, yeah, and then it really wasn't until the age of 14 when I really started to kind of have my own testimony and gospel journey. So I remember it was in Sunday school when I like shortly after turning 14 years old. By our teachers, I remember getting invited to read from the Book of Mormon every day for a week. And for some reason that time I just decided to give it a try. And I started in First Nephi, and I just kept reading after that. I absolutely loved the feeling that I had as I was reading from the Book of Mormon. And so just after that, I started reading the scriptures for hours and hours. I just absolutely loved the stories and the things that I was reading. And along with that, I started to love going to church, and I really loved helping with the sacrament, using my priesthood. And I was kind of that kid who had all the answers in Sunday school, which I think can be a little annoying for some people, but I personally thought it was really fun. Um, and yeah, that's kind of how my testimony started. As for high school, um, at this time I still didn't know that I was gay, and so I wasn't really interested in dating girls. Like, I did go to, like, some dances and everything, but I never really went out of my way to, go meet girls, go on dates with them. I was a lot more concerned with going on a mission, which I'm sure you've heard a lot, Richard. Um, Other guys were distracted by girls, and I just thought that, I don't know, maybe they were less righteous or something, and I was just more on the ball of what I was supposed to be focused on. Um, and as for, like, being told about dating girls, like, I never really remember having too many lessons in Sunday school or priesthood about going on dates with girls. Um, for the most part, I really just remember like having these lessons on chastity, and we would read from Genesis 39, which is the story of Joseph in Egypt and Potiphar's wife, where he was being tempted by Potiphar's wife. And what did Joseph do? He ran away. And so I feel like that's kind of the message that I kind of absorbed was, if you don't feel comfortable around a girl, then get out of there. So that I feel like that's kind of the lesson that I absorbed. Um, as for gay people and LGBTQ people specifically, I didn't have a ton of like personal exposure. It was mostly just like a lot of passing comments in like church and school. Uh, the conversation did start to get a lot more like in your face starting in 2015 when the church came out with its November 2015 policy of considering gay couples to be in apostasy and not allowing their kids to be baptized. I was kind of a know-it-all at the time, and so I kind of explained this away in my head as, this is an example of God separating the wheat from the tares, and that no unclean thing can dwell in God's presence, right? And looking back now, like I obviously don't see things the same. Like, for example, like I don't really like to consider people as unclean things. Like I like to see them as children of God, not things. And uh there was an experience I remember having shortly after that policy came out. I was in seminary my freshman year, and our teacher brought in a bishop who talked about his father who was gay and how his father went in for an interview with Spencer W. Kimball. Um, I believe he was then Elder Kimball. And he talked about how Elder Kimball um, encouraged him to go find a girl to date and to marry, which is what he did. And kind of the moral of the story was, isn't it so great that this man sacrificed so much so that this bishop and his siblings could be here on earth? And so it was a lot of messages like that I remember hearing. And there were a lot of testimony meetings where people would talk about things like the family proclamation. And I've listened to a lot of podcasts on here where people kind of talk about the family proclamation can be a little tough for a lot of people. And you recently, Richard, had Greg Prince on your podcast, and he talked about um, kind of a court case in Hawaii where uh, it was regarding same-sex marriage. And if you just kind of like line up the historical timeline of when the Family Proclamation was published in 1995, you can kind of see that that was in part due to that gay marriage case in Hawaii. And what I think a lot of less people know is that around the same time, there were quite a few Christian groups, particularly evangelicals, who were publishing very similar statements where the wording is very similar. And so I think one thing that I would invite people to do is to go online and look up Family Manifesto by Jerry Falwell. It was published in 1988. So just read that document and then read the Family Proclamation and kind of compare the wording of the two because it's pretty similar. And so I just think it's important, like, to really understand what's going on is to understand this historical context. But yeah, there were a lot of testimonies about the Family Proclamation in church. And then another experience that I had was I remember being at my grandpa's house once with my dad. So it's my dad's dad, and his vision was kind of going bad. And he had a lot of books in his basement, and he wanted us to like have a lot of them because he wasn't able to read them. And I remember picking up one of the books that was The Miracle of Forgiveness by Spencer W. Kimball. And I had no idea what it was. And I said to my dad, like, hey, what's this book? Like, what's it about? And he looked at it and I think he kind of winced and he said, oh, like, you should probably be careful with that book. It may make you feel bad about yourself. And so at that moment, like, my dad kind of protected me against something that I didn't really understand. Because I feel like whether you're gay or straight, like, I feel like that book has made people feel bad about themselves. And so, yeah, it's just like little experiences like that that have kind of like shaped how I view like words of prophets and things like that. One more experience that I had before my mission was in 2019 when the church went back on its 2015 policy. Um, I remember shortly after that happened, I was in seminary my senior year, and we had a lesson on what's the difference between a doctrine and a policy. I don't really remember having that conversation before that policy was reversed. And so I think ever since then to this day, that's kind of been a big topic of conversation in the church is what's the difference between a doctrine and a policy? And so I think, there's a lot of conversations about that now. But yeah, after that, I graduated high school and I got my mission call to serve a Spanish speaking mission in Trujillo, Peru. And I was super excited about that. In January of 2020, I entered the MTC. Um, and then 2 months later, in March of 2020, I left to go to Peru. And I got there on a Tuesday. And then 5 days later, on a Sunday, something comes out of left field, which is that the entire world shuts down because of the COVID pandemic. So and then like 2 weeks after that, I was on a plane going back home to the United States. And that was a really disappointing experience for me because I feel like when you leave the MTC, it's kind of like you're being shot out of a catapult and like you're going 100 miles an hour, But then I hit a brick wall and I just felt like, this wasn't supposed to happen. Um, But kind of what I learned from that is that life plans change and they can change very suddenly. But through all that, we should still trust in God and what He may have planned for us. So after I got home, back to Utah, I was home for a few months, and there was a big blessing that happened, which was that there is a steak farm in our neighborhood that was still open during the COVID pandemic, and so like I wanted to serve, and a lot of the missionaries in our area were going over there. And so whenever I could, I was over at the steak farm serving because I still, even though I didn't have that name tag on for those few months, I still wanted to serve as much as I could. Um, yeah, eventually I got called to go to Anaheim, California, That was my reassignment. And so I was there for the remaining half of, well, for like half of the remaining time I was in Anaheim, California. And then I actually got to go back to my original mission call to Peru.
Wow.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't like they didn't get that experience, but for some reason, because I squeezed in that first time, they let me in a second time. Um, yeah, but do you have any questions up till now, Richard?
No, you're just doing a great job, Hunter. Keep sharing your story.
Okay. Great. Yeah. So I'm not going to talk about too many like specific experiences about my mission, but I do want to talk about kind of some overarching principles that were super helpful for me and that I learned. So in both places where I was in, it was nearly impossible to have a full schedule of finding and teaching because of the COVID pandemic, and there were so many restrictions. We couldn't knock on doors. We couldn't. A lot of the time, we couldn't even approach people. They had to approach us. And I think that just further reinforced that we don't have to be perfect and that nobody is perfect. I also learned that when we do have lessons, that being right and quoting scriptures at people, which was kind of my specialty, uh, doesn't often work, and that a lot of people don't really feel the spirit as much when you feel like you're trying to be right and just convince them. It's a lot more important that they have a spiritual experience. And so kind of going along with that idea of like me being so dead set on the scriptures, I'm pretty surprised that I didn't really have any scrupulosity or religious OCD. Cause like my mom has talked about that with me. She's like, I'm kind of surprised this didn't happen because you seem like kind of a good candidate for that.
True.
And so, um, yeah, I just feel like over time I read the scriptures so much, uh, the Old and the New Testament, where like in the Old Testament you have all of these laws, like the law of Moses. But I also read the New Testament, which talks about that it's impossible to follow all these laws. There's no way that you can do all of them. There's too many. Um, and so I kind of want to read a scripture from a couple scriptures that kind of go along with that and kind of my view on them. So the first one is in the Book of Mormon, and it's Second Nephi 25:23, which is the prophet Nephi speaking to his people. And he says that we labor diligently to write, to persuade our children and also our brethren to believe in Christ and to be reconciled to God, for we know that it is by grace that we are saved after all we can do. And I think a lot of people like in the church have kind of initially interpreted that as God's grace will only kick in once we've done everything, which I think the church culture has definitely gotten a little better at not viewing it that way. But there is a little bit more of a subtle thing that we can do also, um, which is that we also don't believe that Christ will work in our lives until we're trying as hard as we can, which I don't think that's the case either. I don't think anybody's trying as hard as they can. I think only Jesus was the only one who was trying as hard as he could. And to kind of corroborate with that, there's another verse in the New Testament where Jesus kind of gives us that message. And it's Luke 15, and this is the start of the parable of the prodigal son. And it starts off saying, a certain man had two sons, and the younger of them said to his father, give me the portion of goods that falleth to me. And he divided unto them his living. And not many days after the younger son gathered all together, and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. And when he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine in that land, and he began to be in want. The phrase I want to focus on is where he says that this prodigal son had spent all. And I believe that this kind of goes along with the other phrase of after all you can do, that this prodigal son did all he could do to get as far away from God and his family as he possibly could. But in spite of all that, in the end, he was still saved by the grace of God. And this kind of goes along with something that I noticed when I came back from my mission, which was that initially when I left on my mission, like my mom had this sticker kind of up on our wall, which a lot of people have in their homes, which says return with honor. Um, the prodigal son did not return with honor, but he did return. And my mom, she took off part of the sticker that said with honor, and now just on our wall, all it says is return.
Wow.
And I think that's the story of the prodigal son right there. It's return. And so yeah, it was a lot of lessons like that, just about grace and mercy that I learned on the mission of being merciful and understanding to people. This is also just a side note, but there was also a day on the mission where I actually learned that I was gay, and then I totally forgot about it the next day after going to bed. Yeah, I think God just said like, "Let's worry about that later." But yeah, that's a story for another day. So after I got back from my mission, I started going to school again like 2 days later. I was down at Utah Valley University and I was studying computer science. And I eventually moved down to a Provo YSA ward. Um, and during that time, I bought a pair of AirPods and I started listening to a lot of podcasts. And I eventually came across your podcast, Richard, Listen, Learn, and Love, because I saw a Facebook post by a mutual friend named Lincoln Bagley. That's episode 430. If anybody's interested in that, he kind of talks about having some difficult experiences with like some priesthood leaders. He was actually on the same plane with me flying back to the United States when the COVID pandemic started. I never actually met him, but I just think it's kind of cool how like just that little connection kind of like guided me towards this certain direction. Um, so yeah, just like listening to all these different people's stories, I learned about how there are a lot of difficult experiences in the church, and that there are a lot of LGBTQ people in the church. Shortly after that, I was in my YSA ward and a guy was speaking, um, and he was talking about how we should love everyone, and he specifically said that we should also be loving of our LGBTQ siblings. And after he sat down, the stake president was there and he got up and you could kind of tell that he wasn't really into what this guy had said. Um, because he kind of talked about how we're here in this life to change and that we're here to be celestial. And for some reason, I don't know, that didn't sit right with me. Um, because I feel like everything he said was true, but I feel like it was kind of in conflict with something else. So that was kind of the first time in the church where I noticed something that I call a dog whistle, which is basically just simply put, it's just somebody speaking to a certain group of people where they're kind of making vague references just to that group of people. And in this case, it was to LGBTQ people. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later on, but yeah, after those experiences, there was one more experience that really tipped me off to the fact that I wasn't straight, which was in the summer of 2022 when I was down in Provo. I received a message from a sister from my Peru mission. I was a district leader for most of my time there, and the sister in my district, I guess she was eyeing me, which I don't really notice that, which I guess has happened a lot. But um, she messaged me and said that she wanted to try dating me, and I'm like, yeah, we could try. Let's see how it goes. She was living in Peru, and so this would have been like a long distance relationship. And I think that really contributed to me like getting really nervous about it. And I'm like, okay, I don't think I can actually do this. And so, a few days later I messaged her and backed out and said, "Hey, like sorry, I don't think I can make this work." And she's like, "Okay, yeah, that's fine, no worries." And so we just kind of, left it at that. And I kind of explained it away as being a long distance relationship, but I felt like there was something deeper going on because I had gone on dates with lots of girls at that point, and I just felt like this same similar thing kept happening, that I just felt this dread, that I felt like this wasn't going to work. Um and so it was July 4th, 2022. It was the 4th of July, and I had a really long journal entry that day, and like 5 pages into it, I finally realized that I wasn't straight. I like wrote it out. I'm like, I don't think I'm straight. And after that happened, I was just in shock for like the next 3 days. Like that was all that I was thinking about. And at the end of those 3 days, I got on my knees and I asked God, like, Heavenly Father, I don't think I'm straight. Like, what do you think about that? And the response that I got in that moment was, I know, I love you, and everything is going to be okay. And I also got a little line from my patriarchal blessing that popped into my mind where I interpret this line of the patriarchal blessing where it says, uh, I am blessed with the knowledge of God's love, which I think a lot of people can see as kind of like more of a generic line. But when I read that, I interpret it as that I've never had any question whether God loves me or not. That's never been a negotiable thing. It's always just been a constant. And I've seen that throughout my life where, like in high school and on the mission, I never had to go through the experience of like feeling shame for my sexual orientation. I think a lot of people like negotiate that on their mission and think that they can change it. I never had to go through that. And I have never once prayed to have my same sex attraction taken away. Um, and I don't believe that it will be taken away in the resurrection either. Uh, in the past in the church, there were black people who were promised that their skin color would change to white. And I just think this is another similar pattern that we're going through of the same thing. So I just don't think that it needs to change. And yeah, I just kept having experiences like that. Uh, a little bit after that, when I was in the temple, um, I was doing initiatories, and I remember thinking to myself that it's a little interesting where we have this ceremony where we're washed with water, and then immediately after, we're anointed with oil. Because if you think about it, water and oil aren't supposed to mix, right? Like they're always in conflict. And it's kind of the same with being LGBTQ and being a Latter-day Saint. It's kind of like this water and oil situation. But what I got out of that is that with the Savior and his grace, that those opposites can mix and that they can coexist together. And so, yeah, I just really started to build this confidence. And 2 months after I realized that I wasn't straight, I told my parents, like, hey, I think I'm gay. And they had just a really great response. They were really loving. Um, they said that they were supportive. And ever since then, they've done a lot of studying and like read a lot of books. And yeah, they're just really, really great parents and have been super, super supportive. And I don't feel like I need to like we don't feel like being Latter-day Saints and supporting LGBTQ people needs to be in conflict. We can have both. Um, yeah, I guess so far do you have any like questions or comments about anything, Richard?
Well, I've written down some notes that I'll hold to the end, but it's
Okay.
just a great story and really powerful and
Awesome.
very unique. So just keep sharing.
Okay. Yeah, so fast forward a few months after that, in February of 2023, I saw a sign inside the UVU Institute building which says that there is a workshop for LGBTQ people and allies. And so I just decided to show up to that workshop all by myself. Didn't really know anybody. Um, and that class has been a huge blessing. And I think it's one of the reasons why God inspired me to go to UVU specifically. I believe that this class is part of God's restoration of his LGBTQ people. Um, and because this is where LGBTQ Latter-day Saints can have community with other LGBTQ Latter-day Saints in a church sanctioned space. Um, and I think a lot of people might be a little like weary or concerned about like a class like this. Like, what if they hook up? But this class has been sanctioned specifically by a few people. The director of the institute at the time was Sean Dixon, who's now the second counselor in the Young Men's Presidency. And somebody who's attended the class on occasions is Chad Webb, who's like one of the big directors over all of the church educational system. So, they know that the class exists and they approve of it. But yeah, from this class, I became part of a friend group, and we started off calling ourselves the Homo Hikers because we really like to go on hikes. Ever since then, we've now we just call ourselves the Gang, and we spell it GAYNG. Um, and like almost all of us in the group are LGBTQ. And we're really close. We share pretty much everything together. We share our stories, we go on trips together, we hang out all the time. Um, and so I just feel like it's super important for LGBTQ Latter-day Saints to have community with other LGBTQ Latter-day Saints. It's a niche space and there aren't a ton of us, but we're out there. And so yeah, even still as I was part of this friend group, I was still dating girls. I'm just like I'm gonna try and make it work. I just have to find one, right? Um, Although as I kept doing this, I just felt like I was doing a lot of performing. And I was kind of leading these girls on, and that for most of the part, I was kind of mostly just worried about fulfilling church teachings. Like I don't feel like when a straight guy sees a girl in church who he likes and he wants to meet, he's not thinking to himself, I need to marry this girl so that I can get to the highest degree of the celestial kingdom. I don't think that's going through his mind. It's just, I really like this girl. I think she's super cool and I want to meet her. I was just way overthinking it more than was necessary. And so eventually I kind of decided like, okay, maybe I could try dating guys. And so I told my friends like, "Hey, I want to try dating guys." And so I uh, went to my Hinge profile and I changed it to, interested in both guys and girls. Maybe I'll try both and kind of compare the two, see how I feel. And that's actually when I had my first kiss, which was with a guy, and it was super interesting afterwards. Like after I had that kiss, I didn't feel like God was disappointed in me. I didn't feel like I had done something wrong. uh, I just had that confidence of like God was just like, I trust you. And yeah, so I just kept going on dates with guys. And eventually one of our friends in our group, his name is Will, he messaged me and said that he wanted to try dating me. And so in the summer of 2024, we tried dating for a little bit. We went on a few dates, and after we kissed once, I actually panicked. And I'm like, I don't think I'm ready for this. I'm like, I think we're going too far. And so, uh, yeah, I called it off for the time being and said that I wasn't ready. And I kept trying to date both guys and girls at the same time just to compare the two. And I just kept having that same feeling of I feel like I'm performing. I feel like I'm leading this girl on. Um, and I was kind of coming to the conclusion that I don't want to be part of that tradition that's so common in a lot of religions where men take advantage of women to exalt themselves. I don't want to be part of that tradition because I just don't feel like I would be the one for her. And so I had some other experiences as well that really shifted my way of thinking as to, I think dating guys is the right choice. First off, I went to the Gather conference. Um, my parents actually went to the very first Gather conference. I wasn't ready to go at the time. I kind of like came up with some fake excuse as to why I couldn't go. But my parents went. And then a year later, I went to the second one. Um, and from that, I was really just inspired that I should have a lot more open communication with my family about it because I came out to my parents initially, but we hadn't really talked a whole ton about it since then. And so after the Gather conference, I started like really talking to my family about it and telling them my experience. Um, I also read Second Class Saints by Matt Harris, which Richard, I believe you've had Matt Harris on your podcast. Uh, that was a really interesting book. History and timelines really resonate with me, and so I just kind of like realized from that book that sometimes we're really dead set on the way that certain things are, but what's the case is that, some things are more changeable than we like to think they are. Um, and that I don't want to wait around for those things to change. I just want to keep going in my life and not really have these kind of external things going on that are going to influence my decisions. Um, and another experience that I had was in my Provo YSA stake. Uh, I actually volunteered once to teach a lesson as part of an institute class. The institute class was called Answering Gospel Questions. And I decided to talk about LGBTQ people. What about LGBTQ people in the church? And I want to read the question that I posed to everybody right at the beginning of the class. So, what I wrote and showed to everybody said, ever since I got home from my mission, this is like a hypothetical person, but not so hypothetical. So it was, ever since I got home from my mission, I felt spiritually stagnant and lonely. I experienced same gender attraction, and there's been a lot of uncertainty about that. I've gone on dates with people of the opposite gender, but all I feel during those is this sense that I could never make them happy and that I'm being dishonest with them. But over the last few months, I started dating someone of my same gender. I don't feel lonely anymore, and I finally feel like I'm developing spiritually again. Now I get chances to consistently practice Christ like attributes like selflessness, kindness, and communication. I even prayed about this, and I got a familiar feeling of spiritual confirmation. Am I really making the right choice? And so I displayed that question up on the board. People read it for a few minutes, had time to gather their thoughts, and then just for the remainder of the time, I barely had to say anything. Like everybody was raising their hand and jumping over everybody else to try and say something. And like not everybody's opinion was the same, but everybody wanted to say something. And what I learned from that is that young people in the church are really craving this conversation and they really want to talk about it. And, I think as time goes on, it'll become more of a conversation. But there was one more experience that I had a little bit after that. This was in April of 2025. So at the time, I was serving as the state clerk of my Provo YSA stake, and there was a meeting between me, the stake presidency, and all 12 bishops in our stake. And it was pretty much just like a training meeting where the stake president had gone to BYU campus, like it was either earlier that day or like a few days earlier. And it was D. Todd Christofferson who was giving the training. Um, and he said some super interesting things. And like just to start off, like I want to say that I love all the leaders that I worked with. I think they're really great guys. Um, and also like I just don't feel like they're given a lot of great tools for like working with LGBTQ people. The stake president, he was pretty scripted during like what he was relaying about LGBTQ people. He told the bishops to be very careful and to tread carefully. Um, and there was one line in particular that I wrote down, which, this is basically a quote from Elder Christofferson that he was giving to us. And he said that if gay people in the church follow our counsel and keep their covenants, they will experience loneliness. And that just kind of blew my mind that he said that. And then after he said that, he continued and said, and that is why LGBTQ people in the church, or that is why gay people in the church need the fellowship of the saints. And that was just a really interesting thing that he said because, first off, like, I was thinking in my head, like, but God said that it's not good for man to be alone. And I don't think that like I'm the state clerk. I was looking over the ministering numbers in the stake. I don't think that 20% ministering is good enough for somebody who's feeling lonely. Like I don't think that that's going to cut it. And there were just some other things like kind of what I talked about with dog whistles where it's kind of like a vague reference to a certain group of people. I had kind of realized that there's kind of a set of 3 dog whistles in particular that I hear a lot of, and I kind of, like, drew a pyramid to kind of visualize this. So the first floor of the pyramid, or like the top floor, has 1 block. The second one has 2 blocks. And the third one, like the bottom one, has 3 blocks. And the one at the top is to keep your covenants. That one's pretty common, which basically means that, you know, as a gay person, you can either go find somebody of the opposite gender to marry, or be single and celibate for the rest of your life. So that top one is keep your covenants. The second one in the middle, uh, President Oakes and a lot of apostles like to say this, and it's basically like we need to balance God's laws and God's love. Um, there are other iterations of that where they say things like Jesus was full of grace and truth, or uh, we need to remember to love God first and then to love our neighbor. And I hear a lot of that and I just think like, okay, we're kind of doing this balancing act here where we keep like trying to seem more reasonable than maybe we are. And then the bottom pyramid floor uh is kind of something that President Nelson introduced, which is that we are a child of God, a child of the covenant, and a disciple of Jesus Christ. And I feel like that's um I don't know, that can be difficult for an LGBTQ person to understand who's really trying to accept a part of themselves that may be hard for a lot of other people to accept. And so, yeah, those are just kind of like different things that people say to LGBTQ people when they don't really want to talk to them directly. Um, so yeah, I just had like all these different realizations. Um, and one more realization that I had actually came from when Dallin H. Oakes gave his first talk as the prophet, where he talked about he encouraged young people to get married and to start a family. And when he said that, I was thinking to myself, like, I think I'm a part of that. Like, I also should get married and start a family. And so a little bit after that, I decided like, um, I think maybe I should try dating Will again. He had kind of been waiting around for me to finally say that. And so we started dating again a second time. And just about Will, I want to say that he's a super good looking guy, super athletic, very thoughtful, really good at communicating. Um, and he gets along really well with my family. Um, and he's doing a PhD right now to be a behavioral analyst. So he's just a super smart guy, and he's like very emotionally intelligent, way more than I am. But yeah, just like as for Will and I, we both plan on going to church. And are we going to get married? I guess we'll see. But I believe that being married in the church as a gay couple is kind of its own calling. Like I feel like being in a gay relationship kind of closes a lot of doors to you, but being in that relationship is its own calling because it kind of signals to everybody in the room that not everybody is having the same experience at church. And so, we really need to learn different people's stories. And I think, who knows, maybe, one day we're in a family ward and there's a mom who's really worried about her son who just came out to her and she's not really sure what to think. Like, is there a place for my son at church? And then she can see a gay couple at church and think there is a place for my son at church. And so, yeah, I just want to be part of really improving the culture and contributing in that way. Um, so yeah, just kind of I'm kind of like on the ending part, but you have any like other comments or questions, Richard? Or should
Oh,
I just go ahead and
just go
do
ahead.
the
You're
ending
you're
part?
doing
Okay,
great.
awesome. So yeah, one question that I want to answer that I think a lot of people have listening to stories like mine is that some people will say something like, "Oh, everyone in the church has trials. Everybody has temptations. Why, like other people have addictions. Other people have lost family members and loved ones. Like, why are LGBTQ people so special? Why should they get any different treatment from everybody else? Everybody has to follow the commandments." And to kind of answer that, I want to read from the Book of Mormon, And it's a verse in Alma. It's Alma 57:25. And so this is from the story of the Stripling Warriors. And this is Helaman writing about what happened after a battle between the Stripling Warriors and the Lamanites. And Helaman writes that it came to pass that there were 200 out of my 2,060 who had fainted because of the loss of blood. Nevertheless, according to the goodness of God and to our great astonishment, and also the joy of our whole army, there was not one soul of them who did perish. Yea, and neither was there one soul among them who had not received many wounds. So if you read this verse, it says that imagine this is the church, or like the young people of the church, that everyone in the church was wounded, right? All 2,060 of them had wounds. But if you read the first part, it says that there were 200 of them, about 10%, who were fainting because of the loss of blood. And so, yes, everybody has wounds, everybody has trials, but there's a subset of those people who are more wounded than others. And so, and we can't just leave them to fend for themselves like everybody else. Like, we need to give like a certain degree more of attention than what we're currently giving because they're fainting spiritually. And that's kind of happening with a lot of LGBTQ people. And just like one more Book of Mormon connection, there's a story that I wrote that I kind of want to read. It's based on uh, a story that everybody who's read the Book of Mormon knows, and it's kind of like a different twist on a story. And just to kind of like a preface of this, a lot of the symbols that I use in this story may not mean the exact same thing that we usually think they mean. So I want to go ahead and read that story. So it starts off that there was once a young man who found himself lost in a dark and dreary wilderness, shrouded in an almost tangible gloom. As he wandered through it, he noticed numberless concourses of people pressing forward, their faces indistinct and their movement determined. Compelled by curiosity and a desire to escape his isolation, he joined them and followed their path. He eventually came to a rod of iron that was cold and unyielding to the touch. He gripped it tightly as he pressed forward through a dense mist of darkness that clung to him. After a long journey, he arrived at a tree with white, radiant fruit hanging from every branch, glowing with an otherworldly splendor. He was met by an old man who was also holding this rod of iron, who shook his hand and said, "Welcome, my friend. You're in the right place." The young man watched as others approached and partook of the fruit, a look of joy illuminating their eyes as they savored each bite. Eagerly, the young man reached up, plucked a fruit from one of the lower branches, and took a bite with anticipation. To his surprise, the fruit was hard and bitter, filling his mouth with a taste he could hardly stomach. Supposing it to be bad luck, he tossed it aside and reached for another, hoping for something sweeter and more satisfying. But the second fruit was also hard and bitter. Baffled, he picked one more fruit and took a desperate bite, only to experience the same unpleasant taste. The man looked around, feeling a growing sense of isolation and shame as he saw everyone else savoring the fruit with unmistakable delight. Convinced there was something wrong with himself, he approached the old man holding the iron rod and admitted in a confused voice that the fruit didn't taste right. The old man raised his eyebrows, gripped the iron rod more tightly, cast a quick glance around as though embarrassed, and replied in a hushed tone, "I don't think you understand what you're saying. Just keep eating the fruit, and I promise you it will eventually taste sweet. And please, whatever you do, don't mention this to anyone. It will only make things more difficult for you." He glanced down at the old man's hand, knuckles turning white from his death grip on the iron rod. Determined to make this work, the young man returned to the tree and forced himself to eat more of the fruit. He shuddered as it slid down his throat, but he pressed on, each heroic bite further twisting his insides. He ate until he felt sick to his stomach, and with that sickness came an even deeper sense of shame and failure. He then stumbled to a nearby riverbank and vomited in the water. Other people near the tree began whispering among themselves, casting side glances at him. On the far side of the river stood a grand, spacious building filled with people who appeared happy, confident, and proud. Someone in a window called out to him, "What's wrong? Isn't the tree everything you dreamed it would be?" The man sighed and replied, "I don't know. I feel like there's something wrong with me." The person in the window called back, "Let me guess, the fruit doesn't taste right. You know, that's not the only fruit out there. You don't have to spend the rest of your life choking down something that tastes bitter. You could search for a different tree or even come here to eat with us. Please just eat something you can actually stomach." The young man's mouth watered and his stomach growled at the thought. He looked back at the tree where the old man welcomed another seeker, then glanced at the great building with its open doors. He then turned to the far off plains, their trails obscured by dark mist. So yeah, that's kind of the end of it. It's kind of leaves the ending open. Not really sure what the young man's gonna do, but yeah, like that doesn't uh that doesn't match my story perfectly, but I think it kind of brings in a lot of different of people's stories. Um, yeah, so that's kind of like a good example of an LGBTQ story in the church. Um, so yeah, like kind of one more question that I want to answer is like for a lot of people like allies in the church, what can members in the church do to help LGBTQ members? I think that one thing that's super important is that we create spaces where LGBTQ members can have community, specifically with other LGBTQ members and allies. Um, like the Institute class at UVU is a really good start. And I think that there should be a similar Institute class at Utah State and Weber State and Utah Tech, University of Utah, and who knows, even BYU. I know that there's a Come Follow Me group that meets at BYU that's LGBTQ, but yeah, just like create those spaces where LGBTQ members can have community. And I think that everybody should find a way to be creative and to use their talents to help because things are getting better for LGBTQ people in the church. Like I said, timelines really resonate with me. Um, things that have happened in the past, I don't know, decade or so. The miracle of forgiveness went out of print. It went out of print right as the federal government was legalizing same-sex marriage. Um, a few other things like that policy of exclusion was reversed more recently. In Preach My Gospel in the 2023 edition, the baptismal questions were updated. And the question about whether somebody has had same sex transgressions, that was removed in the 2023 Preach My Gospel. And so that's not a baptismal question. And there's just like small things here and there. But really, when you look at a timeline of these things, you can kind of see trends. And I think that's just something that really resonates with me. Um, and there's so many books being published by people. There's like you could probably now fill a whole bookshelf with all of the books from LGBTQ members and allies in the Latter-day Saint sphere. It's a growing body of books, and I just love seeing all of the different perspectives and things that are happening. And I think the Gather conference is kind of a big deal. Like for the more nuanced Latter-day Saint sphere, there's a conference called Faith Matters, which I really think is, people are looking to that as really a space where people can have hard conversations about things that may be difficult in the church. And I think I don't think the Gather conference and Faith Matters are like officially um, like connected to each other, but I do see some very similar things going on between the two of them where we're able to have these hard conversations. And so, yeah, just a lot of things are happening, and I'm really super excited to, see what happens next in this space. And so, yeah, that's kind of the story that I brought. Do you have any other comments, Richard?
First comment is just great job, Hunter. You just
Thanks.
did a great job and shared very unique, fresh perspectives, and it's helpful for me. It's helpful for everybody listening. So there's a lot of people just love to give you a big hug. Uh, these are some of the notes I wrote down, listeners. You know, I kind of just write notes as we go along. Um, I love your father knew enough about the miracle forgiveness to recognize that might make you feel bad about yourself. And I'm glad that book's out of print. When I was a YSA bishop, it was kind of just leaving, and I'd picked up enough. No one had ever taught me to quit teaching from the miracle forgiveness. We don't unteach things; we just kind of let them go out of print. And I had some people that, as I took that calling about 13 years ago, that said, you know, there's better resources for your YSAs working through sin that are probably more positive and helpful than the miracle forgiveness. And as you know, there's a section on it's really the behavior model about sexual orientation, that this is a choice and you can unchoose it. And that's not what the church teaches now. And so I love that your father kind of navigated that with you, not even knowing you were gay, just recognize it might not be helpful. The prodigal son was a home run comment from you. I love the prodigal son, but you brought a perspective no one's ever shared about grace. And he was still, you know, it was grace that brought him back, and it was the worst case scenario. And he did, God loves all of us, and it's grace that brings us back. And then the thing that, one of the sections that brought tears to my eyes, Mama Knott, if you're listening, to this return with honor, to just cross out with honor and just have the word return. Now I'm got tears in my eyes again. Just what a powerful message of non-transactional relationship and love. Your mom didn't sell at anything to do that. She didn't open the door to anything. And I just believe she's role modeling what exactly our heavenly parents would say to us too. And how important that is. I love you talking about dog whistles. That's a term I've heard, but no one's ever defined it for me, Hunter, until you came along and gave real examples of that. So thank you for that. I love this. We're recording this in the morning, and this morning I read a section of a memoir that an 80-year-old gay Latter-day Saint sent me, and it was just, you know, it's 2 generations removed from you, Hunter, practically, and just to hear the pain of going through this with no resources, no understanding, still in the behavior model, this is a choice, suicide attempts, and then reading and hearing you, and it just makes me think what's possible. The lack of internalized homophobia that have, the fact you never prayed and said, take this away from me. The fact that you just, through journal writing and through just logical work, I love the journal part of this, by the way. I think journaling is really a good tool to help us understand what's really going on for ourselves. This is just a great story of what's possible for queer Latter-day Saints to not go through just decades of internalized homophobia and shame and all the bad behavior that comes as you're trying to mask that or deal with that. So this is just a sign of what's possible with good people like you figuring this out at an earlier age, and then eliminating the shame. I love that you said, this is how I'm going to be in the resurrection. This isn't something that needs to be wiped away from me. That helps me understand where you are and the acceptance of your sexual orientation, which straight people don't want to be unstraight in the resurrection. So some people kind of taught me that. It sort of makes sense. Then you said this line from UVU Institute, and you used restoration of his LGBTQ people. I don't know if that was off the cuff, Hunter, or was intentional. Do you remember?
I think I did write that phrase down, but I think part of that is in the class where we have the workshop, there were a lot of pictures of pioneers. And I think that that class is an example of people being pioneers, of treading where other people haven't tread before. And, the pioneer stories that we hear in church, those are part of the restoration.
I just love that. And I've sometimes used the Gathering of Israel as the missionary work you did in California and Peru, but it's also gathering our own covenant people like Hunter to help them feel like they belong and are needed. But I love there's no doctrinal changes at UVU. They're not going rogue as you talk about. I remember when I first stepped in the space, I used to think, could there ever be LGBTQ wards? And we have Somali wards. We have different wards around ethnic identity. Why not around sexual orientation? Maybe that's still possible. That doesn't change church doctrine. It just helps people, as you talk about the community that's so important as you're navigating this road, and the scripture and the scripture stories and the turning to God that's part of that, and just this deep acceptance of who you are. I think we're scared sometimes that gay people accept being gay. We sometimes maybe worry that that's going to lead them in a same-sex marriage, but I think we just need to get over that. God seems to be over that because he created you this way, Hunter. I don't think you're a mistake. I think you're created as intended. So he seems to be over that, and maybe that's just our fear, and we can mature as a church and see the need for community and recognize LGBTQ will need community. We've certainly recognized that in so many other parts of our church. More comments about that?
Yeah. Just that idea of community, like Utah County, like when I was down there, like there was really something happening that wasn't happening before, which is there was that workshop at UVU that's now still happening. Now it's an actual class, and so it's full semester class, and it's happening during the summer too. Um, People are like that class is so good that people want to meet outside of it too. And so like there have been large groups of us who would, during the summer back when it was a workshop, when the class wasn't happening, we'd be like, we're all really sad that this class isn't happening right now. And so we're going to get together on our own, and we're going to meet at a park, and we're just going to like hang out. And then we're going to study the scriptures for like 20 minutes together, like have a spiritual thought, have a spiritual conversation about, what it's like to be LGBTQ and to be a Latter-day Saint when you want to be both. And so like, yeah, there are all these different people, and like most of them haven't been on this podcast, and I'm not calling them out, but but I do think that there's just a lot of people who are out there and who are making it work because they know that they're not alone, because they know that there is a community where we can understand each other on some very important level.
It's great. Um, I did kind of laugh when you sent me the email and your outline had homo hikers on there and you brought it up and I'm not going to call you that, but I just thought, because that sounds derogative, but maybe it's not. But I love that you call yourselves that. And to me, that's just a sign of deep acceptance and a little humor.
Uh-huh.
And your new term, GAYNG, and I thought that was just great. That the community allows you to just have fun. And that to me is a message of deep acceptance that I thought was pretty good. I love you talking about, I wrote down brave talking about gay dating and just starting, even you're changing your profile and just then talking about kissing the first guy. That was a little uncomfortable for me in the early stages of this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I've tried to be real comfortable with that now and just recognize I should respond the same way as straight people with their first kiss and just be glad that you're having that experience. I just think gay dating, from what people have told me and parents, it's a complicated space. And I thought you talking about it helps others. Just how am I going to navigate that? And you were honest about your feelings and pulling back from will. And I love also that as part of that story, you talked about, yeah, my experience coming out with my parents was great. And they even went to gather before me. So Mom and Papa Knott, you are doing a great job and well-deserved shout outs from your son, Hunter. It's a beautiful family love story. But then you felt impressed. I need to have a more complete conversation with my whole family. And I think part of that is gay dating and will.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
And
and they all like everybody in the family loves Will. I love his family, and we just, love being around each other. Um yeah, I was a little worried at first, like, coming out to like my brothers, for example, but they've both been super awesome.
yeah, I've heard enough stories of guys that are closeted, especially that start gay dating and get in a situation where it's an abusive situation and they've got two problems to talk about with their family. They're gay and they're in an abusive situation, and then that person can isolate them from their parents. So I love that that's not your story, but I think talking about gay dating helps others, navigate that if that's what they're doing. And parents, ally parents, I think we have to say, if you're not straight, this is how we're going to respond. And if you're dating, not if you're gay dating, this is how I respond. Even just younger age, high school age kids, just to help them know you're a safe place. I think it's one of the best things we can do as parents. And maybe your dad did that way back with the miracle forgiveness and just set a seed there. And there's
Uh-huh.
probably lots of stories where your parents, you just knew that when it was time to come out, this would go okay. Any more
Yeah, and
thoughts on that, Hunter?
yeah, kind of going along with that. There were also like other really subtle experiences very similar to that. Like, uh, I don't know if you've had like too many conversations about this on this podcast, but like the gospel topics essays are another thing where that can be kind of difficult for people and their testimonies. But like at the age of I was like 15 or something. It was shortly after the gospel topics essays came out. My dad like saw that I was like reading the scriptures all the time, and he was the one who really inspired me to start doing that because I like one day I just like saw his scriptures and just out of curiosity I opened them up and there were just marks everywhere, like under things underlined, notes in the margins, and I thought, that's really cool, and I want to have a set of scriptures like that. But like I remember one time he saw me reading the scriptures and he said like, "Hey, like I think it would be really good if like, you read this set of essays that recently came out by the church where they're talking about like, certain things that are like when you go on your mission, I think it's important that you know these things." And so like he just kind of showed me these gospel topics essays and how like, like yeah, things aren't perfect and sometimes, you know, some prophets will say one thing, some prophets will say another thing, but that doesn't mean that we have to throw everything out, that we can be nuanced, and that we can live in complexity, and that we don't have to know it all, like I used to think that I did.
To me, your father doing that builds what I'd call non-brittle faith, whatever the right word is, pliable,
Uh-huh.
because he introduces principles that you can navigate the complexities instead of this brittle faith that you just never know any complicated stuff. And that can work if you can avoid all the complicated stuff, but it's not. To me, what you have is this long-term foundation of understanding. And I love that you brought up second class saints and sort of opens all of our eyes and hearts to what's possible as we realize the work that President Kimball had to do to change that, and that it was never that way to start with. And it does open my mind and heart to what's possible to provide better support for you, Hunter, in our church. I love this idea. I wrote your matrix 1, 2, 3 on my chart. And I love this. I've, we've this idea between law and love. And I just think we create a false dichotomy that to fully love and
Mhm.
follow God, we somehow have to stop loving some of his children. And we
Uh-huh.
just don't. And it's been relieving for me to not have to worry about everybody else's salvation and just honor their agency. The exception to that is if there's abuse. If you're in an abusive
Mhm.
situation where you're being harmed, you don't need to love your abuser. You need to get out of that.
Yeah.
And so I love that. And I agree also with President Nelson's talk that sometimes that gets weaponized. In fact, recently on social media, somebody took that talk and sort of weaponized it against people like you and said, President Nelson said we should only identify ourselves as these three things. I've read that talk multiple times and he doesn't say that. He says those are our primary identifiers, but
Mhm.
never in that talk does he say someone can't be gay or go to a Somali branch, or there's lots of ways we're identified as Latter-day Saints under those three identifiers. So sometimes, that talk gets weaponized against people like you. Any more thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Just that, yeah, that's definitely been a uh kind of repeated talking point just in the past recent years because it's pretty hard to be a leader of the church. Like I've never been like the biggest calling that I've had is state clerk. And I think that was hard enough. But being like something a little bit higher up than that, like being a leader of the church, like this is a global church. And I think that's really a goal that the church is wanting to have. Like if you go to the church office building, what do you see? You see flags from like every country where the church is present. And that's what you see at the MTC, like all these different flags. And like when you listen to General Conference, you're going to hear a lot of people from a lot of different countries. And they're going to talk about stories of saints in Latin America and in Europe and in Africa and in Asia. And then when the conference ends, the first commercial that you're going to see is a commercial by the church where it talks about, what the church is doing in Africa or what the church is doing in Latin America. Like this global church, like the church really, really wants to have that. And I think that's a good thing. Like, I think we should be all encompassing of all people, no matter where they are. And I guess like there's a little bit of a contradiction in that like I also want the church to be uh a place for LGBTQ people, which doesn't always seem to align with the priorities of foreign countries like Africa, some of Latin America, um Asia, Russia. They don't seem right now to be super interested in gay rights or LGBTQ rights. But they have been passing laws recently that kind of like ban things like same-sex marriage, which I think is a precursor to a gay rights movement. So we'll see
Mm,
what happens.
super thoughtful and lots of grace and perspective. I love you referencing President Oaks's talk about getting married and starting a family, and how you feel that's your path. And I'm glad you've got Will in your life. I recognize you're not sure if you'll get married, but this seems like a really healthy relationship that's built on trust and respect, and you know him well, and you have a lot of community. So I just support you as on what path you feel is best. And you're right, you have these three paths. You have the mixed orientation path that was presented to you as a high school student. And that's a valid path, listeners. We have guests that are in mixed orientation marriages, and I've learned that's a valid path. They usually say, don't take my story and weaponize it and send it to someone like Hunter and say, this is how to live your life. They just say, let me live my life, and this is what I feel is my path. We have people that are celibate and feel really called to be celibate, just like I'm going to come. You feel called. I think forced celibacy is really difficult. I think if you actually feel called from God to be celibate in the church, that is a better path than forced celibacy. And then you have this path of the same-sex marriage. That the only hard part of my story is if you and Will get married, you can't fully participate in the church.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
And you have a wonderful theologically intelligent mind. You are a terrific teacher. I bet anytime you've taught, it's been one of your towering strengths is to teach in a group or to teach individually. You're bright, you're thoughtful, you're well-read. You often go back to the scriptures to answer questions. You have this poem you read at the end that I think you wrote.
Uh-huh.
So the only hard part of this isn't just you, Hunter, it's just where we are is that, and you want to participate in the church. You and your husband want to go to church, and you feel called to be a pioneer because you see that was all. I hope everybody got why Hunter wants to go to church. It's because he wants to help other people, even though he may find that difficult at time attending church. So that future gay kid's mom, might see some proximity with Hunter and his husband. And that gay kid may say, maybe there's a place in this church for me because I'm seeing people love Hunter and his husband. And that's all just back to your heart of wanting to do things that help other people. But, at this point, you wouldn't be allowed to teach a class, I don't think, in a same sex marriage. Hold a temple recommend, obviously. So I just mourn that that's not a possibility for you and for other couples. And we're worse off for that, is my opinion, because of the because we don't have a chance to have your contributions as we gather Israel. We're coming to the end. Any final comments you've got there? Anything I've said that's a little off you want to clarify?
No, it's all been great. And yeah, just kind of going along with the idea of like being in a same-sex marriage is kind of its own calling. I think that also can come with like its own challenges as well. Like I think a lot of the time in the church we talk about how people try too hard to be perfect. And I think, we talk about in the LGBTQ community of being authentic. I think that if you are trying to be a same-sex couple in the church, or just an open LGBTQ person in the church, that there's another pitfall that is right in front of you of a different kind of perfectionism, where your whole life you've had this narrative where, if you come out as gay and if you go and marry a guy, that you're going to be sad, that you're gonna, wickedness never was happiness, that your life is going to fall apart. And I think a lot of people try to prove everyone wrong, and that, I now have to have a perfect image, that I now have to prove to everyone that my life is not falling apart, and that I am super happy and smiley all the time, and that everything is great. And I don't think that's the right way to go about it. Um, yeah, like, I don't think there's been a whole ton of discussion about, like, people like, about that kinda thing, but I think it's something that deserves, more discussion and deserves, like, a little bit more treatment by people who wanna be openly LGBTQ and in the church.
I love that. And that is a bit of pressure. I've heard a little bit about that, is that gay couples feel like they need to be perfect because there's kind of these people on the sidelines that have this story in their mind that you can't be happy, your marriage won't be successful, you can't be good parents, you can't be financially stable, because we've got these stories in our mind that it's hard for us to give up those stories. And so I do recognize that a little bit. And I hope allies like me that had stories in our mind, I hope we can just kind of be curious and maybe rewrite our stories um, and just hope that everybody that goes into a marriage and makes that covenant, it's still a legal civil covenant for Hunter and whoever he ends up marrying, that we want those marriages to be successful because they want them to be successful, and they're going in with the intention to make them successful and not make it about us and our story and having to have whatever is going to happen in your life fit some pre-programmed story. So that's a really good subject. I wrote down the name of Elder Kevin Brown, listeners, who spoke in General Conference in October of 2025. He's a Black general authority that gave one of the great talks of that conference. He's from Jamaica. And I thought about him, and guess I thought of that, wouldn't it be wonderful one day and we all loved his talk, those of you that listened. And I've just have wondered, when I listened to that talk, I thought, will I ever see the day that we have an openly gay or lesbian or trans person give a general conference talk? And will we all, because we have proximity, go, that was an incredible talk? Could that be you, Hunter, one day? You're no different than Elder Brown was at 25. But when he was 25, he's only in his 50s, so he was probably too young to be alive during the priesthood ban. But, if we were growing up in the 60s or 70s and we somehow got to watch General Conference in 2025, if that was possible, and we saw Black general authority speaking, as with the priesthood, obviously, we would be shocked. And you know that because you read Second Class Saints and what we said about Black people up until the priesthood revelation. And some of that still exists in our culture, unfortunately. But when I listen to you, Hunter, you could give that talk. And all my LGBTQ friends, I feel that way about you as you've navigated really complex things and have stayed close to our Heavenly Parents and the Savior and the Scriptures. And I do hope for that day someday. That's kind of my last thought. Any thoughts from you on that, or anything else you want to share in closing?
Yeah, just like I don't know if I would give a super good conference talk, but it reminds me of in 2020 when they had like two youth speak in general conference. I think they did look pretty nervous, but I would probably look more nervous.
Well, thank you for doing this, Hunter. You're a good man. You've got a great life ahead of you. And um, it's just the perfect time for you to decide which road is right for you. You're the best self you've ever been. For those of you that are walking these roads and trying to figure out what paths, I think Hunter is role modeling. Just become the best person you can be as you decide which of these paths you're going to go down that I talked about earlier, the mixed orientation marriage, the same-sex marriage, or feel real called to be celibate. And if you're thinking about suicide, that's just solve everything. And I recognize a lot are suicidal. Please just choose to live. Listen to these stories of hope like Hunter, and you're going to be okay. But it's a perfect time for you to write your story and fully author your story on these paths, because I think you're the best Hunter Knott that you've ever been. So thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really, really love the podcast. Really love all the stories. So I'm glad to give my 2 cents and share my story.
And thanks for everybody listening, and all those that are involved in that group at UVU. That's terrific. This is Richard Ostler and Hunter Knott signing off from another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love.